Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode, this episode continues what I said last time about how the setup of these next couple of episodes is going to be them finding the keys to open the way to the cursed treasure. That is what the series has been setting up so far, and this episode is more of the same. They face off against the monster and eventually find the next key that they need. But yeah, there is another thing. There is another thing in here that's kind of important about this episode is kind of important in that it shows Professor Pericles finally going, not finally, but I guess going even further off the deep end. And there is a thing to that winds up becoming a big thing going into the episode. But in case, the episode opens up with Frances Jackson in her cooking show setup. If you guys remember, she was in the episode with the Dreamweaver at the start of the second season. So she comes back in this episode, apparently trying to redo her thing and trying to make a comeback after she kind of exposed herself on national television. She's trying to make a comeback. Case in point, she's doing cooking shows again. That's the big thing that she's trying to do to get her stuff back. Sure enough, when she's on TV, she's making a rather unhealthy dish. I don't remember the name of the dish, but all you really need to know is that it's a croissant wrapped in bacon and then deep fried, and that is just terrible and gross. And you're not, and yeah, that just sounds completely unhealthy. And Frances even admits to her audience that she admits it's not healthy, and she points out if anybody has any sort of health concerns, all she has to point out is I'm not a doctor. Don't take my word for it. So in any case, she then proceeds to start preparing things ahead of time, like a good chef host does, where they're showing you how to make things, and are actually showing you all the different steps that are required to make the thing at home. And then they have the second dish in the background that they prepared ahead of time, so that they can continue onward with the meal prep while the meal that they started is just currently being worked on. So yeah, but in any case, she then proceeds to go. But in any case, as she's doing that, and taking her pre-prepared bacon croissants out of the oven, suddenly there's a massive bubbling coming from the stovetop, and she tells them that happens at home to just add more baking soda, but that only just seems to agitate it and make it worse. And then a massive demon that we later find out is called the Gluten Demon proceeds to emerge from the pot, and then proceeds to eat Frances Jackson and all the food in sight. And what we find out is that Dr. Rick Spartan, if you remember him, he was from the first season with the Headless Horror, and his assistant Kachinga, they're watching everything. They're watching all of this at home, and Dr. Spartan, he immediately goes into action, and immediately tells Kachinga to get the van ready, and Kachinga just nonchalantly finishes his drink and kind of expresses a half interest in going on a road trip, and that's where their story kind of ends at this point. But and of course, and it's at this point where we learn about it. We also learn that apparently Professor Pericles, he's been locked out of Destroyed Corporation systems. And he then immediately goes to confront Mr. E about it, who, as we find out, is, despite the fact that she's dead, he's actually, probably because she's dead, that's reawakened some old feelings in him. But either way, he's very much thinking about Cassidy and very much how much he misses her, and has pictures of her open on his computer. So when Professor Pericles flies in and accuses and is very angry with Mr. E, he immediately turns off his computer, and Professor Pericles tells him that he's been locked out of the systems, and of course Mr. E points out that was actually on purpose, as it turns out, and very understandably so, considering what Professor Pericles did last time he had access to his systems. Mr. E has effectively locked Professor Pericles out of the systems because he doesn't want Professor Pericles using his money to make any more monsters or whatever the hell to actually try and kill Mr. Incorporated or anything else. He tries to put his foot down and very much tells him that he can't do it. That he's not allowed to do any of that anymore. Pointing out that that's it, that that's his company. He's very much in charge of it. He doesn't want it, and points out that he built the company from the ground up. He should be the only one person really running the show here. But of course, this causes Professor Pericles to become very pissed at Mr. E to the point where he slaps him around, which is actually kind of impressive considering the massive size difference between the two. But of course, Professor Pericles proceeds to knock Mr. E on his back and tells him that he's not in charge of, that he's never been in charge of anything. He's not going to be in charge of anything. Tells him very much that that angrily shouts at him that he's a little more than a human mascot for him and a shoulder for him to sit on, and that he will never be in charge of anything ever. So yeah, it's clear now why Mr. E and Professor Pericles. It's clear now why they haven't worked together before, because they have a very dysfunctional relationship, as this episode reveals. They just do not get along, like, at all. Even though they used to be best friends, but now they're not. So yeah, clearly things have gone. Clearly, at some point in the past, things have gone completely south. But in any case, following that. We then get a cutaway of Shaggy's room where Scooby's currently curled up under the blankets, and Shaggy apparently tells him that he's not eating enough, even though Shaggy also admits that he ate like 6 total square meals throughout the course of the day, which to be fair for Shaggy and Scooby isn't eating enough. So I guess he does have a point, but. Yes, he does tell him that he needs to eat, but of course, Scooby then proceeds to sit upright and describes what happened in the last episode during his most recent trip with Nova, about how she sat bolt upright, said Nibiru is coming, then sat right back down. And Fred notes that that's very weird and very strange, considering the fact that Nova is a dog and should not be able to speak. And as Fred is saying that, Daphne actually walks over to Scooby's picture of him and Nova together, and does kind of look at it, a little bit longingly, before setting it back down. Meanwhile, it's at this point where Velma then proceeds to tell everybody that what she's been gathering about how they've been gathering keys for a while now. Which they don't fully understand what's going on, other than the the plasmeric disc has been sending them in the general direction of whatever these keys are supposed to be, and she doesn't fully understand what they are. And of course she's also been researching a book about Nibiru called a book written by Horatio Caron, who only appears on the back of the book, so I'm only going to picture him that way. But yeah, he is a character that seemingly is going to be important going forward, considering they decided to name him, show a picture of him, and then proceed to name his book, considering the fact that his book is kind of the main thing that Velma is using to research Nibiru and try and figure out what it is. And she does proceed to point out that it has her completely stumped, because no scientific explanation seems to be pointing to what they're trying to figure out, and does ultimately conclude that for the first time in their history, they may have to consider the fact that there's something actually supernatural going on. And to be fair, it's not the first time it's the first time this gang specifically, this version of the gang, has actually faced off against a supernatural threat. Not the first time ever. In fact, I think the first real time where they fought and faced a supernatural threat was all the way back in new Scooby-Doo movies. Because and more recently after that, the Scooby and Scrappy Show, a whole bunch of other things. But yeah, the point being that this group has never experienced supernatural creatures before, but the main group has experienced plenty of those. They've seen a lot. But yeah, she then proceeds to go on to explain but in any case, Shaggy then decides to actually decide that there's only one real way to actually deal with this sort of situation, and that's to kind of go eat food and think it all over. pointing out that and then suggests that the gang go out for pizza, pointing out that that's what he and Scooby normally go when things get scary. And Scooby actually does wind up perking up at that idea. And also is very happy about the fact that they could possibly get a deep dish pizza. And with that, the gang then decide that pizza sounds actually kind of good, so they do take Shaggy's suggestion and get into the mystery machine and proceed to go to the pizza parlor. And of course, as they're driving, and Daphne then points out that with all things happen, and pointing out that she feels like that with everything that's going on, she feels like life especially with Nova, she feels like life is going to be too short, and then points out that she thinks she's ready to hear some honest feelings about how it feels. So, talking to Fred specifically, and ask Fred what he's feeling, and of course, Fred, he doesn't really have any sort of answer to any of that. It's very clear that he's just not obviously, this incarnation of Fred, not very open with his feelings. I'll openly admit that. He's not a very openly loving guy. He's not that kind of person. But it did take quite a bit of pulling for him to actually propose to Daphne in the first season. So, yeah, it does. So yeah, it definitely is going to. So yeah, the fact that it took them this long to rekindle the relationship, kind of, sort of, it makes sense. We're almost at the end of the second season, but it makes sense. Yeah, but in case she then asks him what he's feeling, and he then proceeds to just run out of the mystery machine once they get there, and says that he's feeling hungry, and just barges out with her hollering back that hungry is not an emotion. So, at which point the rest of the gang then proceed to follow Fred into the pizza parlor and proceed to order a pizza. And they proceed to sit down and try to work everything through. But as they're sitting down to eat, Rick Spartan and Kachinga then proceed to drive their vehicle through the front of the building, which of course scares everybody inside. And of course, Dr. Spartan then proceeds to order Kachinga to start throwing all the food out into the streets to kind of get rid of as much of it as they can. And of course, everybody is visibly confused as to what's going on, namely the rest of the gang. While Fred is just like, well, he's just happy to see his hero again. And of course, Daphne wonders why exactly it is they're throwing out all the food, but Fred merely points out that whatever it is, he's pretty sure they have a good reason, and decides to get in on the ground level of that. So he immediately starts helping first and foremost, he greets Kachinga and Rick Spartan as old friends, before helping them throw out all of the food and into the streets. And of course, Scooby and Shaggy quickly see the writing on the wall and decide to take their pizza under their table where they can consume it safely and far away from whatever it is that's going on up above. So, yeah, kind of pretty smart. If somebody's chucking food, Scooby and Shaggy are obviously going to take offense to that. It's very smart of them to just kind of hunker down under a table until it all blows over. So, yeah, in any case, it's at this point where Kachinga mentions that the demon doesn't seem to be there. But of course wonders if they got there, and of course wonder if they got there in time. But it's at this point where the gluten demon actually winds up showing up, and then proceeds to barge into the pizza parlor, and then proceeds to consume everything in sight. And even being able to sniff out Shaggy and Scooby's even able to sniff out Shaggy and Scooby eating their pizza under the table, ripping the table out away from them, and then eating it. And then it's at this point where Scooby and Shaggy then decide to start cowering and get as far away from the demon as possible. But of course Rick and Fred then proceed to try and charge straight at the gluten demon and get knocked around by it. And at which point the gluten demon eventually rampages a little bit before leaving. At which point they proceed to pick themselves back up. And Scooby and Shaggy Shaggy specifically, but Scooby and Shaggy just look around, and Shaggy is just absolutely slack-jawed in awe at the fact that the monster was able to just eat and consume everything, and he can't help but be a little depressed and a little upset. But in case they proceed to actually pull, but in case it's at this point where Fred decides to ask what's going on. And Dr. Spartan and Kachinga then proceed to pull everybody outside to give them an explanation. Then with Dr. Spartan then proceeding to hand Kachinga a book, a scrapbook, which Kachinga holds begrudgingly, but they then proceed to start flipping through it, and Dr. Spartan, he then proceeds to go on to explain how it's a gluten demon, and he proceeds to explain how he's faced several in the past, and that the gluten demon specifically has been plaguing people since the Egyptian times. It shows up randomly, eats people's food, and then leaves. And he points out that it's obviously going to cause a famine problem if this continues, because it's obviously eating everything, and that's going to cause a lot of issues. But and of course, he points out that that's actually not the only demon, the only food-based demon. Flipping through the scrapbook to show several crudely drawn pictures of other demons that he's faced that all are similarly food-themed. But he also points out that obviously he doesn't have pictures of them because as he points out, Kachinga dropped the camera, and Kachinga even openly admits that it's difficult for him to wield a spear and hold a camera at the same time. At which point, although Kachinga seems to start signaling her not to say it, but at which point Daphne asks why Marianne didn't just hold the camera for him. But at which point Dr. Spartan goes into this big long story about how she was taken away by flying bugs. But in actuality, Kachinga then proceeds to reveal that actually she just left him. She went to go live with her mothers, and they're having problems. So this of course causes them to become upset, become upset, and of course Dr. Spartan is just very upset about the fact that his wife left him, obviously, so to the point where he made up a fake story to cope. So yeah, he's not having a good. They're obviously not having the best times, but in case it's at this point where Velma actually winds up getting a phone call from her mother. So she immediately picks it up, but instead of hearing Angie Dinkley on the other end of the line, she hears the gluten demon. And of course, the gang immediately drop with Kachinga and Rick Spartan in tow. They immediately drop everything to go to the Crystal Cove Spook Museum, and specifically the Broken Spine where her mother works, to go and investigate. And sure enough, the place is completely trashed. The snack bar is just a mess. And of course, Rick Spartan and Kachinga immediately spring into action, and with Kachinga taking an offensive stance with a spear, while Rick Spartan goes to check for things, and when Fred follows immediately after, and they do eventually find one of the deputies knocked in the back room, and Daphne asks him what he's doing there, and he immediately tells them that Sheriff Stone, you sent him there to kind of investigate and make sure and secure the crime scene, but he decided to hide instead. And now that he's given his story, he then proceeds to go back into the other room and hide. But first, Velma does ask him what happened to her mother. So he tells her that Angie's fine. She was sent home. She's fine, completely fine. And then he immediately goes back to cowering in the back room. At which point the gang quickly Dr. Spartan quickly realizes that they're going to need to take a bit of an approach to actually take down the gluten demon, and then does research that fortunately he knows a potion that will help them stop the gluten demon in its tracks and actually capture it. And then proceeds to hand it to Velma and tells them that that's the ingredient list that they'll need to actually create it. And Fred is very happy about the fact that he gets to do finally a three-pronged approach which he's never actually been able to do before because he's never had enough people. So he insists that he and Dr. Spartan will set a trap. Shaggy and Scooby will go off, devour all the food in sight so that the gluten demon will actually come to the trap. And then Shaggy and Velma, Daphne, and Kachinga, they'll go craft the potion to actually, stop the gluten demon. And Shaggy and Scooby are very happy about their roles, and immediately vote and are very happy about the fact that for once they get to eat as much as they want, and it's relevant to the mystery. So those two immediately leave to go do that. While Scooby and Shaggy, while Fred and Dr. Spartan then proceed to start setting up the trap, and Kachinga, Velma, and Daphne then proceed to get into Kachinga's truck and then proceed to drive off. But as they're leaving, Kachinga tells them that that they can probably throw out the potion recipe since it's probably rubbish, and then proceeds to tell them that actually he points out that Dr. Spartan's plans have always been a little bit half-baked, especially since his wife left him, and that he hasn't been doing well with actually formulating plans since Marianne is usually the one to come up with them. So he insists that instead they go and actually try and figure out the mystery and try to figure out what the gluten demon actually is and who's actually hiding behind the mask. So because obviously it's somebody in a mask. If that hasn't been obvious. In the entirety of Scooby-Doo, I don't know what to tell you, but of course Velma and Daphne are very happy about the fact that they get to solve the mystery instead, so they proceed to do that. And it's at this point where we get a bit of a cutaway sequence where we do actually see all three groups going about their respective tasks. Fred and Dr. Spartan, they start building an epic trap to actually catch the gluten demon, but throughout the sequence, Fred notices that Dr. Spartan keeps looking at his picture of Marianne that he keeps in his wallet, and notes that he seems to be notably very depressed about the fact that Marianne isn't there with them. Meanwhile, Velma and Daphne, they kind of go to all the places that the gluten demon hit, including various restaurants that we've seen before, including the rebuilt Bloody Steak, and a couple of other restaurants that we've seen throughout the Crystal Cove. We've seen them all at this point. But and as for Scooby and Shaggy, they also go to every restaurant in town and just start devouring everything, because that's what they were tasked to do. And it's to the point where they actually start gaining weight, which, isn't a thing for Scooby and Shaggy normally. So that should emphasize how much they're actually eating. They don't normally get fat. So, yeah. But in any case, as they're doing that, we actually get another cutaway with Mr. E, who tells Brad and Judy that Professor Pericles has gotten a little bit out of control, and that they need to kind of phase him out of the group because obviously he's causing problems. So he asks them if they can trust him, and Brad and Judy say that they can. And he tells them that yes, they can go. That he'll absolutely find another way to go look for the cursed treasure, and that they can actually go look for it together. But also tells them that they shouldn't breathe a word about this to anyone, and then proceeds to go back inside. But in any case, after doing that, it's at this point where we actually see them kind of investigating the mystery. They eventually, with Velma, Daphne, and Kasinga arriving at the studio that was supposedly attacked by the gluten demon, but they notice that it seems strangely fine and doesn't look like the site of an attack at all, which strikes them as a little bit odd. And of course, they start poking around, and it's at this point where they actually meet a man named Albrecht J. Schwartz, who, as we find out, owns the studio that Francis Jackson films her cooking show in, and we don't find out much about him other than that. But what we do find out is that he's actually highly insistent that they give him his insurance money because he thinks they're from the insurance company. And of course, Kachiga eventually tells them that they're actually not from the insurance company and that they're not going to give him any sort of money. But he doesn't know that, and then he then proceeds to grumble about insurance and leaves. At which point, Velma finds a shipping order to a warehouse on the outskirts of town that seemingly has Albert J. Schwartz's initials on it. So they decide to go to the warehouse where they eventually do find out that it's a little bit strange that there's a warehouse just in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of Crystal Cove. But they do go inside. They go around to investigate, and they get closer to the actual warehouse. And once they get inside, they note that there's strangely a large pile of food and cooking ingredients that is just seemingly completely untouched, which strikes Velma as a little bit odd. And of course, this is at this point where Daphne finds yet another shipping order. Once again confirming that once again seemingly signed by an AJS. Which of course Kachinga concludes might be Albert J. Schwartz, since that's the only person they've met with those specific initials. But of course, as they're doing that, they then see the gluten demon, who appears out of nowhere and tries to attack them. And Kachinga immediately springs into action and throws several cooking ingredients at it, which it only eats to get bigger, and proceeds to chase after them. And they climb onto the pile where they wind up trying to fight off the monster, and it winds up grabbing Kachinga at one point, but he takes his satchel and then proceeds to smack the gluten demon in the face with it, which somehow drives it off, and it goes completely away. And of course they do find it a little bit, and of course Velma finds it a little bit strange that worked. And Daphne asks him what was in that satchel, and he then reveals that actually the only thing in that satchel was his lunch. And it's revealed in an earlier episode that earlier in the episode that he's actually he and Dr. Spartan are actually on a gluten-free diet to kind of lose weight, and that was all that was in there. It was a gluten-free lunch that was just happened to be a salad and a couple of other things. So yeah, he points out that that's really the only thing that was in there, and of course Daphne wonders if that is in fact the thing that drove it away, but and wonders if it was in fact something that about the demon itself. But Velma points out that that's actually a little bit strange, and they just and points out that they'll need to continue investigating. But she has a hunch about who she thinks the gluten demon actually is. At which point they get ready to go and reconvene with the rest of the group and tell them what they learned. Meanwhile, Scooby and Shaggy have reconvened in the restaurant where they have actually set up the trap, and of course Dr. Fred is very happy about the fact that the trap has turned out so well. While Dr. Spartan points out that he just wishes Marianne was there, and also continues to claim that she was once again taken by monsters. But Fred catches him in a lie because he claims it's a different monster. This time a troll, but he claims it's a different monster than the thing that actually took Marianne. And of course he realizes that he said something he shouldn't have and tries to correct himself, but just kind of shrugs it off. But meanwhile, Shaggy and Scooby are just sitting on the floor, obviously very heavy from the fact that they ate all the food in Crystal Cove and are notably too full to move or react or do much of anything. So but of course, they then proceed to get ready to set up the trap, at which point Velma, Daphne, and Kachinka come in, and Velma begins to tell them what they found out about the gluten demon. But it's at this point where the gluten demon charges in, and what we find out is that that the trap that Fred and Rick Spartan set up is just a giant net full of bread and other things. So they immediately the gluten demon, of course, makes a beeline for that, and they immediately trap the gluten demon in the net. But what we find out is that the gluten demon, because it's eaten so many things, is actually too heavy for the net to hold it, and it eventually breaks free through sheer weight alone. At which point the rest of the gang and Dr. Spartan and Kachinga, they try to fight back, but similarly just knocks them around a little bit. So and of course it also starts ripping up tables and throwing them at the girls. And Scooby and Shaggy, who are notably too fat to move and have seen the whole thing and are also too fat to be too full to be scared, then decide to actually fight back against the gluten demon, pointing out that they're not gonna sit by and watch the gluten demon attack their friends. And after using each other to get themselves up, they then proceed to challenge the gluten demon to a sumo match, which of course the gluten demon openly accepts their challenge for, and they proceed to sumo wrestle it into the streets, and proceed to start bouncing it around a little bit in between cars, into lampposts, and a whole bunch of other things. And eventually, while the gluten demon does at one point knock Shaggy away with a lamppost, which seemingly doesn't faze him at all, considering the fact that he's a little bit too fat to really feel anything. But yeah, he just kind of bounces it off as like a cushioning. But eventually, Scooby and Shaggy do manage to dogpile on the gluten demon and trap it. And it's at this point where Fred and the rest of the gang, they proceed to come out, and Fred decides to actually remark that it's time to unmask the gluten demon and see who it really is. And then it's revealed to actually be Francis Lee Jackson, which, as we find out, Velma isn't particularly surprised about given what they found. As it turns out, there was never, the cooking show that everybody saw was never actually a live broadcast. As it turns out, she pre-recorded the whole thing, used video editing to edit the gluten demon into the show, and then proceeded to disguise herself as the gluten demon and attack everything. And what we find out is that Francis Lee Jackson isn't even her real name, and I don't know her real name, but conveniently, her real name happens to be AJS, which everybody thought was Albrecht J. Schwartz, but is actually just Francis Lee Jackson's real legal name, and that Francis Lee Jackson is just a stage name. And of course, everybody wonders why she did it, at which point Francis Lee Jackson proceeds to explain exactly why she did it. She proceeds to go on to explain how, obviously, because of her cornbread stuffing and because she got exposed on national television because she revealed that her cornbread stuffing didn't have actual corn in it, She decided that the best way to do that was to actually figure out how to actually regain her popularity. And the best way she decided to do that was to actually start her own restaurant. But of course, starting a restaurant means there's going to be a lot of competition. So she decided to kind of thin the numbers a little bit by eating all of the food in Crystal Cove, so that there would be nobody to compete with her, and then she could just go on to start a restaurant and become famous again. And of course, also what we find out is that the reason she had such a strong reaction to Kachinga's lunch is because apparently she has a very specific food allergy where she can't eat or touch anything healthy, which is why all of her foods are unhealthy, disgusting things. So, that's why she reacted so strongly. But she didn't mean she would have gotten away with it had it been for their meddling bread haters. At which point Sheriff Stone's deputies show up and proceed to roll her out of the neighborhood, quite literally, because she's too fat to actually be moved in the normal way. But as she's being rolled around, she actually drops an antique dish that apparently belongs to her. And she winds up claiming that that's hers, and that no one else is allowed to have it. And she claws at it rather pathetically in an attempt to get to it, but she can't actually reach it because it rolls out of her grasp long before she's able to actually start clawing for it. But it winds up rolling right to Velma's feet, and Kachinga notices the designs and everything on the bowl, and notes that the bowl itself seems to be ancient Mayan in nature. But then Velma gets a closer look at the bowl when she actually has it, and what we find out is that that's actually the third key, the Tesoro Lave, which, as it turns out, is supposed to be the third key that they need to actually find the treasure. So again, as I said at the start of this review, they're just setting up ideas where they're going out of their way to actually, find all the keys that they need to open the cursed treasure. That's what the thing is about. That's what the past couple of episodes have been setting up. They're finding all of these keys. They're going to eventually use them to find the cursed treasure. That's what they're setting up right now. But in case once they conclude that this is in fact the third key, they then proceed to celebrate. At which point Fred proceeds to walk over to Dr. Spartan and tells him that it's not too late to reconcile with his wife, and tells him to give her a call and let her know how he really feels. And Dr. Spartan then proceeds to take Fred's advice to heart and does exactly that. And of course Daphne asks him if he's feeling okay, and of course, she points out that he's not feeling quite better yet, and then proceeds to take Daphne's hand and tells her that he's feeling a lot better. At which point, Dr. Spartan reveals that he did in fact call Marianne, tells Kachinga that they're going to be able to reconcile things, and the two of them then proceed to get into their jeep and go to Marianne's mother's house. So and they then proceed to leave, and while the gang gives them a wave goodbye. Meanwhile, back at the Destroyer Corporation, the rest of the original Mr. Incorporated gather with Professor Pericles, and Mr. E then tells him that he's out. They just tell him that they've decided to vote him out of the group because he's causing a lot of problems, and it's really to the point where they just kind of need to put their foot down and get rid of him. And of course, he tells him that they need to go and that he needs to leave. But then, as he's telling Professor Pericles that he's out, he then proceeds to collapse in pain, and it's revealed that Professor Pericles actually is holding a remote, and he then proceeds to reveal that Brad and Judy actually told him very much about the mutiny he was trying to create. So he decided to get even with Mr. E by giving him a crippling operation where he inserted a mutated cobra larva into his spine to control him by releasing, and that every time he presses the button, it activates the device in Professor Pericles' spine that causes the cobra larvae to release its venom into his spinal column and cause him unbearable pain unless he does exactly what Professor Pericles says. So he tells us, at which point he tells Mr. E that he's still very much in charge, and then tells them what their plan is going to be. That they're going to take the plasmic disc away from the new Mr. Incorporated, and then destroy them. And then laughs maniacally at the end of the episode. and repeats the thought of him destroying them, and then that's how the episode ends. So. Yeah! So, first and foremost, this episode establishes that now that this episode was very much a way for Fred and to realize that he still has feelings for Daphne, and they finally get back together in this episode. Not officially, they haven't stated it yet, but that's been a thing that's been building for the past several episodes now, and now it's finally a thing. But it's now finally officially paying off. But meanwhile, and of course, they now have the third key, which is going to be very important for them going forward, because they're going to need that to actually get to the treasure. I'm assuming, because obviously, if you're going to name it key, if you're going to use the Spanish word for key for all of these, it's kind of implied that they're going to be going on to go and use those to actually open up some sort of door at some point. So yeah, it's clear. That I'm not sure what kind of doors, because obviously they're just an assortment of random objects at this point. But you know, it definitely seems to be building to that they're going to be able to use that to actually find the cursed treasure. Meanwhile, Professor Pericles has effectively taken full control over Destroyer Corporation by crippling its president and CEO with a button that he can press at any point to inject spider venom, to infect cobra venom into his spine. So yeah, Professor Pericles is maybe one of the most dangerous villains that the gang has faced, because for the simple fact that the fact that he kills someone and that's somehow not the worst thing he's done, that's kind of overkill. But yeah, and this is kind of nuts. But in any case, I'm interested to see where the rest of this is going to go. But it's clear now that Professor Pericles is going to try and do something with the Plain Spirit Disc. He's going to try and eventually take it back from the New Mystery Incorporated. So that's going to happen soon, most likely. That's going to happen sometime very soon, because obviously he needs that. He's going to need that to actually find the cursed treasure in the first place. So taking it away from Mystery Incorporated, that's kind of important. He kind of needs that. But in any case, that's going to do it for my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below, or over on my over on my just over on my Patreon. Just go follow all my things. I have a card for all the things. I don't always remember to list them all the time, but so just go to my card. It's on my Twitter. Go follow me over there. It has all my things. Just go check that out. And in any case, yeah, thank you guys. Just and also be sure to go check out my streams. I'm going to try streaming Saturdays and Sundays going forward, so hopefully you guys will be around for that. But yeah, go check those out. Link is down in the description. Just go check all of those out. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video I recommend to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!